Okay. Everything's great. Everything's great. What's good, guys? Welcome back. Welcome back to me. Everybody, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Marcello. I talk about media with a focus on 90s kids books, mostly. And in this series of videos, I am recapping and reviewing each of the Animorphs books by K.A. Applegate. Today's video will focus on The Stranger, the 7th book in the series, and the 2nd book narrated by Rachel. Before I get started, I know a lot of you are probably very eager to know how the meeting with K.A. Applegate went. I will tell you right now that it was wonderful, and I also will tell you that I will tell you in more detail how it went at the end of this video, and feel free to skip to this timestamp if for some reason you don't care about the whole video and just want to know what it's like to meet one of the best middle grade authors of the 90s and maybe ever. And I'm putting this at the end because this whole video is very scripted and I'm probably going to ramble and not make a ton of sense, so with that out of the way, let's get into the video. The Stranger. The Stranger is written by K.A. herself. The front cover quote is, "This time, there may be no way out." And the inside front cover quote is, "A little something to bear in mind." I've noticed that the inside cover quotes tend to be a little bit on the punny side, while the outside ones tend to be a little more serious. Let's keep an eye on that. Here's some trivia for you. This book is actually the first one in which the narrator of the book is the only person to acquire a new morph in the book, as well as, spoiler alert, the first book in which the Animorphs travel through time. Fun fact number 2, the Elemist was actually inspired by the character Q from Star Trek, as well as the novel Flatland, a late 1800s sci-fi romp that's actually pretty entertaining, if lacking by modern entertainment standards. That's all the interesting stuff that I could dig up about this book, so let's jump right into the recap. There's no cold open in this one. We're dropped right into the Yeerk invasion elevator pitch. My name is Rachel, you know the drill. The narrative then opens with Rachel and Cassie standing outside their town's main event venue, the city arena, watching the circus pack up for the night. Rachel, whose parents are divorced, had attended the circus earlier that evening with her dad and her sisters on one of his rare in-town weekends. I think K.A. did a lot to make sure that there was a diversity of home lives represented in these books. Tobias doesn't really have parents and he's kicked around from relative to relative. Rachel's parents are divorced. Marco's got a single dad who's fighting a depression that prevents him from being a provider for his family. I suppose Cassie and Jake are kind of normies, but Cassie's mom seems to be this, alpha of their family, which is cool. And Jake's got the Tom issue to reckon with, which kind of prevents him from being a full normie. I kind of had a weird and volatile home situation as a kid, and while it wasn't directly represented in these books, it was definitely refreshing to have characters that I could relate to on some level. Anyway, Rachel's parents are divorced, and her dad comes to town periodically to do random outings with the fam, and this time he's taken them to the circus. Rachel has dragged Cassie along, and Cassie is now predictably incensed by the treatment of the animals, specifically the elephants, whom Cassie and Rachel observe being poked with a cattle prod prior to the show. For those of you who don't know, a cattle prod is like a stick that delivers a powerful electric shock to the recipient of its blows. Rachel and Cassie watch the elephant trainer make a big show of loving the elephants during the show for the crowd, and it just furthers their ire. So after the show, Rachel decides to give the trainer an elephant experience he won't forget, and Cassie only lightly protests since, as we know, she loves animals and hates seeing them mistreated. So Rachel sneaks into the elephant pen as human, and then she morphs elephant, which has been her battle morph up until this book. As a kid, I found it a bit odd that Rachel always picked elephant as her battle morph, since elephants are generally perceived as pretty gentle creatures, but as a grown-up, I've seen YouTube videos of bull elephants in something called musth, and if you are not familiar with this, look it up. It's very cool and very crazy, so I understand this choice now. Anyway, Elephant Rachel starts to make a scene in the pen. This causes Joseph the trainer to come in to investigate, and Elephant Rachel then picks him up with her trunk and in thought speak tells him that she is a member of the International Elephant Police and that they've heard some complaints about him. She threatens to skewer him on her tusk if he ever hurts an elephant again with a cattle prod or otherwise, before throwing him across the yard where he lands on a tent 20 feet away. This is super risky behavior and is yet another example of the Animorphs not really taking security very seriously in these early books. I suppose an elephant trainer for the circus isn't really a high-value Yeerk target, but their plan is to eventually infest everyone, so who's to say that this guy won't wind up with a Yeerk in his head at some point? A Yeerk who would be very curious as to why an elephant used thought speak on a random human for cruelty to animals, using some human or at least Earth-specific terminology and slang in the process. On the flip side, Andalites and Morphers aren't the only beings to use thought speak, so maybe any future Yeerk might actually think that there's a clandestine elephant police force out there monitoring circuses for animal abuse. I think I'm going to choose to believe that this is what happens. You will not be able to convince me otherwise, so please do not try. The next day, Rachel debriefs with the rest of the gang, receiving some light flack from Jake for her actions. She doesn't tell Jake that Cassie was with her because she likes Jake and doesn't want him to be mad, but with Rachel, apparently it's a different story because everyone knows that Rachel's just going to do whatever she feels like. Rachel tells us that she she's not into danger for its own sake, but that she likes to feel as if she's involved in something very important, an interesting insight into her character. At this point, we get descriptions of all of the characters, and we actually learn some new things. It turns out that Rachel and Jake were not very close prior to the events of the invasion, and that while Tobias was barely acquaintances with Marco and Jake, Rachel did know him in some capacity. So the gang's conversation shifts when Marco lets Rachel know that he has something important to tell them. They walk into the forest to meet Axe, and then after some fanfare, Marco tells them that he's found a way into the Yeerk Pool. He lets the group and the reader know that the Yeerk Pool is huge, practically a small city underneath their town, running under the school, the fire station, a few gas stations, and even the mall. Axe chimes in at this point to let us know that Yeerk pools are generally large and elaborate, the Yeerk equivalent of what forests and meadows are for an Andalite, or what the mall is for a bunch of middle school or high school kids. Marco lets the group know that he and Tobias have been surveilling Chapman, with Tobias watching him in the air and Marco tailing him every time he enters a building. This is an unexpected collaboration, as Marco and Tobias are about as dissimilar as any of the two Animorphs could be, but I am with it. I love both of them. Jake is annoyed that he was not let in on this mission, but Rachel knows that Marco was likely trying to give Jake a rest after his ordeal with Temrash in the previous book. Marco then divulges that this new entrance to the Yeerk Pool is apparently in the changing room at the Gap, although it appears to be an entrance only, with a corresponding exit in the multiplex. The gang then deliberates over what to do with this information. Axe wants to attack them outright, but he eases up a bit once the details of the Animorphs' last foray into the Yeerk Pool are relayed to him. Cassie starts asking Axe questions about the Kandrona, and Axe gives the group a little lesson in Yeerk culture. The Kandrona, he says, is a miniature version of the Yeerk's home sun, and its rays concentrate in the Yeerk Pool. The Yeerks must swim in their natural form in the Yeerk Pool every 3 days for nourishment, or they will starve to death, like Temrash did in the capture. Axe states that the Kandrona could be anywhere, even miles away from the Yeerk Pool, and Rachel agrees, stating that they could possibly just go on a recon mission to the Yeerk Pool to try to ascertain the location of the Kandrona, which in Axe's estimation could be as small as a car or as large as Cassie's barn, depending on how many pools it has to support. And after some light deliberation, the Animorphs decide that the destruction of the Kandrona would be detrimental enough to the invasion that it is worth another trip into the Yeerk Pool to try to find out where it is, and the meeting comes to an end. Later, Rachel is at home with her mom, and her mom tells her that her father will be coming over for dinner with them. This is atypical, and it puts Rachel on alert. Rachel and her sisters spend one weekend a month at their father's house, who lives in the city, presumably not too far from where the Animorphs all live. Later on, after dinner, Rachel's dad tells the family that he's taking a job in a city 1,000 miles away, so he'll be seeing them a lot less. Rachel's upset by this, and she storms off to her room after she hears the news, and her dad follows her there, and he tells her that there's more. He tells Rachel that unlike her siblings, she is old enough to decide if she wants to go with him to this new city. He tells her there's a super elite gymnastics school there as well. We know Rachel's very into gymnastics, and that he would love it if she would move there with him. He tells her to sleep on it and to talk to her siblings and talk to her mom, and Rachel thinks that it's not her siblings and her mom that she's worried about, but the Animorphs and the fight against the Yeerk invasion. She agrees to sleep on it, and her dad leaves. That evening, Rachel morphs Owl and goes for a pensive flight alone. We learn that Rachel has always been close to her dad, who wanted a boy, but later said that he no longer needed one because he had Rachel, and she knows that this is kind of sexist, but she appreciates the compliment nonetheless, and she wonders what he would think of her current endeavors. Then, in spite of herself, Rachel starts fantasizing about a life where she can go to gymnastics and hang out with her dad and not fight the Yeerks. Now, slight nitpick, I know that it's like thousands of miles away and everything, but for how long, realistically, does Rachel think that she'd be able to not worry about the Yeerks? I get that the invasion is still a relatively new thing. I think it's only been like a month or so since the events of book 1, but even if it's a few years before the Yeerks find their way to Chicago or wherever her dad's moving, they'll still definitely get there at some point, especially with Rachel not there to help the Animorphs contain the threat at its source. Anyway, Rachel flies into Tobias's territory, and she frightens him when she lands on a branch next to him. He asks her what's going on, and she wants to tell him about her dad's proposal, but she thinks about the life that Tobias lives, and she finds that she can't. So instead she tells him that she's just worried about going down into the Yeerk Pool again, and she asks if he wants to fly over to the gardens with her to acquire a grizzly bear or something. He rejects her, and he asks what's really bothering her, and Rachel asks Tobias if he ever thinks about years from now when it's time for college and stuff, and what they're gonna do then if the Yeerks are still around. Tobias tells her that he thinks it's probably gonna either go one way or the other by then, and Rachel regrets bringing this up to Tobias, who's already a casualty of sorts in this war. Thinking about this gives Rachel a new, albeit probably temporary, resolve, and she flies away, leaving Tobias and heading for the gardens. She acquires a grizzly bear there, and she heads home. The next evening, the gang all meets up at the mall. When Rachel meets up with Cassie, they pretend to be surprised to see one another. Apparently, this is an essential part of being cautious and keeping their cover for any controllers who might be watching. The reasoning here is that they don't want to appear as a close group of friends, lest some observant controller realize that the same group of friends is always hanging around near their Yerk pool entrances and try to infest them. This makes some degree of sense, but Rachel and Cassie were already friends, so I don't see how pretending that they just randomly ran into each other at the mall accomplishes much in this case. Also, they immediately loudly start talking about Axe and his human morph, so if anyone is listening in, they're gonna get an earful. Also, this abundance of caution doesn't exactly line up with all of the extracurricular activities that the Animorphs have all been enjoying throughout the series. Things like Rachel's elephant intimidation of Joseph the trainer in the beginning of the book, or her elephant intimidation of the potential mugger / assaulter a few books ago, or Axe, Marco, and Jake's attempts to convince the lobster lady that she only dreamed that they demorphed in front of her, or Tobias and Rachel's rescue of the Lady Hawk. The list goes on, and it's probably going to go on a little bit more as the series progresses. This isn't a new point. I'm just beating the probably dead Animorph security is inconsistent horse now, so I will stop. Ultimately, the group convenes at the store in which the Yerk pool entrance is hidden, the Gap. They all go into the dressing room and morph roaches, and they meet up in the stall that houses the entrance. Eventually, a human controller comes in and exits through a secret doorway behind the mirror, and the Animorphs follow. One more small nitpick here. I've worked in retail before. I actually worked in retail for about a decade. It was terrible. I worked at Zara on 34th Street in the city, as well as Uniqlo on 34th Street in the city for like most of my retail tenure. Very bad. I have a million stories. Maybe we'll hear them someday. Anyway, something that you have to constantly deal with when working in retail is theft, which largely occurs in the fitting room. There's not a ton that retail associates can do to combat theft. There actually isn't even a ton that loss prevention can do in most cases, but being super attentive about people entering and leaving the fitting room is one of the few things that we could control. So there's always a ton of emphasis put on paying attention to who was using the fitting rooms, how many items they had with them at any given time, all of that. All that's to say that it seems a little sus to me as a former retail worker that the Animorphs are able to just go into the fitting rooms and never leave without any suspicion arising, especially since there must be human controllers manning the store. And if that's justified by the fact that there's a Yerk pool entrance there, so there are people always disappearing behind the mirror, so it's probably Yerks who are watching it, it's still pretty sus. Like, they do know. I guess they don't, right? They don't know who they've caught or not caught as a controller at this point. They're so disorganized, the Yerks. They're so completely disorganized in this invasion. I'm off script right now, but it's like every time I have a nitpick like this, it could be explained away by the fact that the Yerks are just super disorganized in their invasion effort. And I guess Visser 3 does get like continual flack for how badly he botches the invasion, so fair play, I guess. Anyway, in spite of all of this, the Animorphs are once again able to sneak down into the Yerk pool. It takes them like 45 minutes to actually make it down to the pool, so you've got to appreciate how much effort it probably takes the controllers to keep their cover while still getting fed. Like, they have to live whole lives and still go to the Yerk pool every 3 days, and it seems like it's probably an all-day thing to go down there. As a refresher for those of you who haven't read the books in a while, the pool complex is this vast underground cavern, larger than a sports arena, with various stairways and paths emptying into it, and in the center there's a giant lake full of Yerks with 2 piers built over it, one for Yerks to leave their hosts and one for them to enter. The Animorphs arrive at the pool and they absorb the horror for a minute, and then they decide that they want to start looking through the various buildings on the outer edge of the pool, hoping to come across a clue as to where the Kandrona might be. I'm going to take another pause. I'm being so critical in this book. Maybe it's because I'm tired. I don't know. This is the silliest plan the Animorphs have ever had. Going down into the Yerk pool is like their least favorite thing to do. It does not go well for them, and they're kind of just stabbing in the dark to try to figure out where the Kandrona is. Like, they're roaches, so their senses are super dulled at this point. What do they really think that they're going to find there that might show them something substantial? What do they really think they're going to discover? It seems like a needlessly risky plan with like very slim chance for reward. And if there is a reward, like, again, what do they expect? As they're searching, Rochel manages to get herself tongued by a taxon, and right as it's about to eat her, time stops. At this point, the Animorphs are kind of force demorphed, and they find themselves returned to their natural forms without even trying. As they regain their eyesight, Rachel sees that they're in a sort of cafeteria surrounded by controllers. Are you kidding me? Go home. Get the fuck out of here with this loud-ass truck. As they regain their eyesight, Rachel sees that they're in a sort of cafeteria surrounded by controllers of all races. Tobias appears in his human form, and then a voice comes out of the sky, followed by the appearance of a humanoid figure with eyes like black holes who is glowing blue. I could never not picture the Ellimist as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Anyway, this is the Ellimist. Axe is already familiar with him through Andalite fairy tales and is duly intimidated by him, but the Animorphs are not. The Elemist, as Axe describes him, is everywhere at once, inside the very fabric of space-time. Jake asks the Elemist why he's there, and the Elemist tells them that they must decide the fate of the human race. The Elemist tells them that while he typically doesn't interfere in the private affairs of other beings, I'm laughing because he's such a liar, when they're in danger of becoming extinct, he'll occasionally step in to save a few members. He says that he loves life, especially sentient life, and that Earth is basically a grand work of art. He then takes them on a tour of Earth's wonders, telling them that in all the universe there is no greater beauty than that on Earth. So at this point, the Elemist takes the Animorphs back to the Yeerk pool, and he tells them that the Yeerks are going to win the war. The Animorphs are going to lose, and soon the only humans left are going to be human controllers. As he says this, Rachel can tell that he is not guessing. He seems to fully know that this is true, and Rachel feels the immediate sort of fight or flight fear that she'd been experiencing so far in the fight turn into a deeper, more existential dread. The Elemist continues, telling him that he'd like to take them all to a new planet with some of their family members, some other random genetically diverse humans, and a small sampling of Earth creatures to go start a society on some habitable planet somewhere. If they make this decision, Tobias will also get his body back. The Elemist tells them that they must decide now. The alternative is that he leaves and he restarts time exactly where it was and leaves them to fend for themselves. The Animorphs are vocally opposed to this at first, but they soon begin deliberating amongst themselves. As the debate goes on, Rachel looks around and notices what looks like a drop shaft off in the distance. You know, one of those carless elevators that they took in the pool ship, and she has an idea. She wonders to herself if the drop shaft goes up as well as down, and she's able to tell that this one seems to go up based on the direction that the hair of one of its passengers is blowing in. Time is frozen, so she just sees like the person's hair blowing down, I suppose, because they're going up. Very astute, Rachel. Poirot would be proud. The debate goes on, and Cassie points out that the way they're feeling now is kind of similar to how the animals that she cares for will often resist medical treatment and other forms of help from humans because they're afraid. This gets Rachel to thinking, which leads her to considering her family and how they would vote in this situation, or what they might think of her if she decided to save them, but in doing so gave up the fight against the Yeerks. At this point, Jake tells the Elemist that he doesn't believe that the Elemist can actually tell the future, because then he would know how they're gonna vote. Basically, if they have any choice at all, it invalidates the idea that the future could be so fixed that their fight against the Yeerks will be futile no matter what. With that, the group votes against the Elemist's proposal, and time restarts. As the group snaps back into their roach bodies, they hear the Elemist's voice in their head state that if they live, he will ask them one more time. As time resumes, Rachel finds herself once again stuck to a taxon tongue, where she is promptly swallowed whole. She demorphs inside the taxon, whom Axe splits open with his tail, and they run out of the Yeerk cafeteria as human roach hybrids covered in taxon guts, which no doubt explains why not a single Yeerk present recognized that they were mostly human. Eventually, the Animorphs make their way to the drop shaft, with Rachel and Axe running a little behind the group. At this point, Rachel morphs Grizzly Bear and goes into a full bloodlust rampage, killing a bunch of Hork-Bajir and eventually coming to her senses, realizing that she is attacking Jake, who has joined the fight in Tiger Morph. They ascend the drop shaft, and Rachel regains her senses. The drop shaft deposits them at the base of a water tower near their school, and the Animorphs all stumble home. The next day, Rachel is in a weird sort of jaded mindset. A byproduct of her going into berserker mode as a grizzly bear the night prior. She skips school for the first time in her life, trying to distract herself from everything that's on her plate, but nothing really works, and she eventually flies around as Bald Eagle. Later, the gang meets in Cassie's barn, where Jake confronts Rachel about her behavior, calling her out for sneaking off to acquire a bear on her own, as well as for skipping school, which is verified by Tobias, who spied her soaring the thermals. Rachel points out that since the Elemist claims that they are inevitably going to lose the war, her actions don't really matter, and Jake kind of agrees with her, dropping his leader persona and revealing that he's also been impacted by their recent otherworldly encounter. Ultimately, their decision leads to Rachel confiding in the group about her dad's offer, which leads to a near meltdown. In the wake of this, Marco says that if the Elemist gives them the same offer of a new planet to inhabit, that he, Marco, will be voting yes. He lists the various ways that the group is falling apart. Tobias is trapped in bird morph, Rachel is now morphing to escape her problems, and Marco tells them that he himself has a tenuous grip on his own sanity. Jake tells Marco that Jake won't be giving up, but Cassie replies by comparing the Animorphs to a raccoon who's been caught in a trap. The raccoon bit Cassie as she was trying to free it. What if the Animorphs are acting like the raccoon in this analogy, and the Elemist is just offering them the only way out of certain doom, and they just can't see it because it's beyond the scope of their understanding? At this point, the Elemist's huge, disembodied voice interrupts them again, and he tells them that this time he will show them what they need to understand. The Animorphs are instantly transported to the middle of an empty field in this bleak-looking industrial area, with Tobias again in his human body. After a few minutes, they realize that this is their school, but it looks like it's been in a war zone. From this, Cassie surmises that they they may be getting a glimpse of the future. They observe that the sky has a yellowish tint to it, the air smells funny, and the trees appear to be dying. Axe lets them know that he senses some type of time distortion, which the Animorphs take as confirmation of their theory that they are indeed in the future. Not really knowing where to go from here, they just walk for a little bit, eventually coming across a classroom with a skeleton lying crumpled across a teacher's desk. This teacher, or whoever's body it is, was just left there to decompose. The book really makes sure that we understand this. These books progressively get darker as they go, but it is by no means a smooth and even journey. Some of the books do more than others to darken the tone, and I feel like this is a particularly precipitous drop. The group then decides to go to the mall, which makes perfect sense given the circumstances. Once they reach the mall, they discover that it appears to be functioning as some sort of taxon hive, and Rachel realizes that what they're seeing is the potential future if the Yeerks win. Reasoning that they can probably safely walk around in their human forms, as any passing Yeerk will just assume that they're human controllers, the Animorphs decide to take a drop shaft that they spot from the street while Axe laments the loss of the mall and all its tasty foods. The drop shaft takes them to a Yeerk train, from which they're able to see all of the things that have changed in this grim version of the future. There's a Yeerk pool on the roof of the mall with taxons lounging around it poolside. The Animorphs also see that entire skyscrapers are gone, while the ESG Tower, the biggest building in the city, appears to have had the top 2 floors covered by some kind of glass dome. They then see that the city's biggest event venue has been replaced by a Yeerk pool the size of a lake. There are human and Hork-Bajir hosts being kept in cages on the banks of the pool, and Rachel notices that while they are crying, they're not crying for help because they know that there is no help coming. As the gang gapes at this new horror, a human controller jostles Rachel, who instinctively reacts with sarcasm, something that spikes the suspicion of the offending controller. She asks Rachel for her name, but Tobias intervenes by convincing the woman that they are escorting Visser 3, who they find out is now Visser 1, with Axe morphing Andalite to further their ruse. It works, somehow, although it draws the attention of nearby controllers, obviously. At this point, the group sort of stands around loudly wondering why they're there and why the Yeerks have chosen this location for their massive Yeerk pool. And Cassie is talking about how she has a feeling that there's something deeper going on that they don't understand, because Cassie is the closest thing that the human race has to an interdimensional shaman in this universe. A bug fighter lands on the near side of the pool, and now Rachel has an urge to get closer to it. Axe is still in Andalite form, so they get a wide berth, although this is super sus, as Axe is clearly not physically Visser 3. Axe is like a little baby Andalite boy, and Visser 3 is an old, hardened, like chiseled warrior. Anyway, they get to the bug fighter, and the door opens, and the real Visser 3 steps out, and he says, "Right on schedule, just like you said it would be." And Rachel looks over and she sees a 22-year-old version of herself standing next to the Visser, who greets her by saying, "Hello, Rachel. Things are getting weird." So future Rachel explains that she knew that they would be there because she had a memory of this exact moment. Future Rachel is, we find out, of course, a controller, and Visser 3 explains to them that he knows exactly why they're there and what is happening. Present Rachel looks at her future self, and she knows that her future self is hiding something, and she tries to figure out why the two of them are there. So they're definitely there because of the decision that the Elemist has given them, but they're either there for one of two reasons. Either they're there to change the decision that the Animorphs made the first time around, for reasons unknown to Rachel, or they're there because their presence was essential to pushing the Animorphs to making the same decision that they made the first time around. This is a little bit confusing, and Visser 3 states out loud that it's very confusing at this point, which I think might have been a little like cheeky KA apology to the reader for getting wonky with it, but I don't mind. I'm not going to give a detailed summary of all of the time travel philosophizing. It's in the book. You should not watch these videos instead of reading the books. Go read the book. The books are great. You guys love Animorphs. You know the books are great. Axe at this point winds up threatening future Rachel, which causes future Rachel and Visser 3 to react with surprise, and present Rachel realizes that they've gone outside the purview of future Rachel's memory, and from this she's able to ascertain that Axe must not have existed in future Rachel's timeline. Visser 3 reacts by telling Rachel that once he caught them, he gave each of their bodies to one of his lieutenants and they roasted and ate Tobias. Brutal. Imagine not having control of your body and being forced to eat your like cross-species situationship boyfriend. Very cool and horrific, KA. Axe now has a breakthrough and he realizes that Visser 3 is probably scared to hurt them lest he change the present by changing the past. So the gang all does battle morphs and the Yeerks retreat. I've got like a light issue here, just a question really. Why would Visser 3 care that much if they changed the future? It's already been established that the Animorphs of the present are in a different timeline because of Axe's presence. Visser 3 is impetuous and selfish. I feel like he probably wouldn't care that much about the fate of like an alternate timeline version of himself. But Visser 3 is also very cruel and spiteful. spiteful, so maybe he's just doing this for the sake of it. Who knows? It doesn't really matter in either case because the battle never comes to pass as the Ellimist transports the Animorphs back to the woods behind Cassie's farm with Tobias in his hawk body once more. This is very distressing to the Animorphs, especially Rachel, who's overwhelmed by the decision at hand and the more distant but somehow more immediate decision of whether or not to move in with her dad, and she's trying to come to terms with the fact that they will, beyond a shadow of a doubt, lose the war against the Yeerks. Except they won't, because it's been established already that they're in a different timeline, but whatever. The Animorphs decide to vote on whether or not to take the Ellimist up on his offer, with Rachel kicking them off by voting yes. There's some discussion, and ultimately the yeses win, but nothing happens. So the group goes home, and they go to school the next day, and Rachel's having trouble paying attention for obvious reasons. She's thinking that there's a chance they might just be zapped off to another planet at any given moment. I'd have a hard time paying attention in school too. Rachel is having a serious existential crisis here, and she's having a hard time seeing the point in doing the day-to-day things like focus on school. In history class, Cassie is feeling jaded and impertinent and is agitating their teacher with questions about changing the past, which causes the teacher to give a speech about the butterfly effect, which is a little bit on the nose, but I suppose it's totally fine for a middle grade book that incorporates time travel in a serious way. The teacher looks straight at Rachel at one point while talking about like the butterflies and repeats a single butterfly over and over again in what we assume is probably like an Ellimist-induced trance. At their lockers after class, Cassie and Rachel wonder what just happened and what's going on and why the Ellimist has not transported them yet. They wonder if it's because they didn't give him the answer that he wanted. Cassie realizes that it's possible that in their first encounter with him, he intentionally showed them the drop shaft in the distance that allowed them to escape. At this point, the bell rings and they have to go to class, with Rachel wondering if she is the butterfly in question here and when she is supposed to beat her wings. That night, Rachel has a very on-the-nose, trippy fever dream where she's a butterfly flying towards the light of the Kandrona, with Axe talking to her about the Yeerk pool and Cassie talking about how the Ellimist showed them the drop shaft. She wakes up with a plan already fully formed in her head. She's putting on her morphing outfit when she considers, just for a second, going back to sleep, not telling the others her plan, allowing them to continue to be on board with being taken to a new planet. She feels a deep despair stir inside of her as she considers the implication of once again picking up the fight against the Yeerks, but she looks at a picture of her dad and she wonders what he would think of her before she morphs and leaves. She wakes up Tobias, and a few hours later, the whole gang is convening once again in Cassie's barn. Rachel tells them that she knows the location of the Kandrona and that the reason that the Ellimist showed them the future was to show them its location. She also points out that they must have the ability to change the vision of the future that they saw, because if they didn't, the Ellimist wouldn't have bothered asking them what they wanted in the first place, not to mention leaving them there after they did choose to leave. I find that totally unethical, by the way. I was gonna save this rant for the end, but I'm gonna just get it out of the way now because I keep thinking about it. Axe is always talking about how the Ellimist doesn't care about fairness, and the Animorphs disagree and they say he is fair because he legitimately offers them a way out of all of these situations, but I don't think that that's remotely fair. He's actively, obviously acting in favor of the Animorphs, or at least in opposition to the Yeerks. They already decided to go. They voted yes, they missed the clue, they lost. Is there a cutoff in place for the point at which the Ellimist decides to give them what they explicitly asked for? He didn't give them a time limit for their decision. Was he just never going to take them in the first place and just hope that they figured it out eventually? Are there so many obvious loopholes to the rules of his engagement with Cryak? I just don't think that this is too far off from him just kind of popping down and telling the Animorphs where the Kandrona is all. It seems like it was kind of low stakes on his part. What's to stop him from interfering like this more often? Anyway, that's all that I wanted to say. Basically, like, if I were Cryak, I would cheat a lot more because the Ellimist is cheating. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm sorry. Read the Ellimist Chronicles. It's a really good book. Anyway, the Animorphs realize that the ESG tower, that giant shiny skyscraper that survived the Yeerks' razing of their city and had some kind of shiny dome put on top of it, must be where the Kandrona is. Rachel says the Ellimist wasn't interfering. Technically. The choice is still ours. But that's silly because technically he was interfering. He interfered. He actively interfered. They know knowledge now that they didn't know before because he interfered. It bugs me when people use the word technically to mean like specifically not. What they mean is like in a specific and weird, like from a certain angle he wasn't, but technically he was interfering. Anyway, I'm gonna stop. The Ellimist can do whatever he wants. His ethical code is beyond the scope of my human comprehension, obviously. Also, maybe like now is when, if they decided they wanted to go to the new planet, the Ellimist would take them. Maybe he wanted them to have full knowledge before making their decision, but it still seems like a big old loophole to be like, it's fair for me to interfere because I'm giving them a choice, but their choice doesn't count until they realize the one thing that I want to show them that I'm not allowed to tell them outright for some reason, and that's going to help them win the fight. I'm going to stop now. I'm actually stopping. Thank you. So the Animorphs talk about the butterfly some more, and I feel like this was a really big 90s trope. Am I right here? The butterfly beating its wings in China, starting a tornado in Africa. Is this like 90s wisdom? Anyway, the group knows where to attack now, and they are going for it. Later, they conduct an assault on the ESG building. They do a brute force attack in battle morphs, all of which they manage to fit into the skyscraper's elevator in a funny scene that definitely predates all of the Marvel movies. Rachel accidentally attacks a group of 8 Hork-Bajir at once because her grizzly bear eyesight is so bad, and there's a very brutal fight where basically everyone almost dies and Rachel's forced to demorph. Exhausted and mostly human, the gang continues to push into the building, ultimately finding the Kandrona, which is this giant ball. Rachel's able to summon enough strength to morph Elephant, where she knocks the Kandrona to the floor and rolls it through the windows where it smashes to the concrete down below.
What's good, guys? Editor Cello here. No microphone, filming this on my phone. Apologies for the inconsistency in quality. I just thought about something that didn't occur to me while I was writing the script for this that I wanted to just add in. One of the themes of this book is Rachel sort of starting to come to terms with the role that she needs to play, which is that she is the cudgel. She's like the brute force, the muscle of the group, as it were. And her getting her grizzly bear morph is like a very big part of this, because like I mentioned earlier in the video, elephants are like gentle for the most part, and you know, up until this point, Rachel's own like personal ruthlessness has turned the elephant morph into a decent weapon, but her like natural character combined with the bear's predatory instincts are like a force to be reckoned with, and continue to be for the rest of the novels. But it is very interesting that while she uses the bear morph to great effect, acquires it in this book and uses it to get him out of a couple of kind of iffy situations, sacrificing a part of herself in the process, because, you know, every time she goes into berserker mode and just like kills indiscriminately, you know that it has an actual impact on her. It's getting her closer to like her final role of like just the weapon of the group, but she's still human and she's still a character like that we're supposed to care about and sympathize with. Ugh. Anyway, very interesting that like while the bear morph is used to great effect, it is the elephant morph that she ultimately needs in order to destroy the Kandrona. Maybe there's some intentional symbolism there, or maybe I'm just reading too far into it. Anyway, enjoy the rest of the video.
The Ellimist speaks to them at this point, telling them that a replacement Kandrona will be there in 3 weeks. The group wonders how much of a difference this has made, and if they've successfully changed the future, and Rachel says that she doesn't think the Ellimist himself knows, and that there may be greater or larger forces at play. The Ellimist seems to agree with this. The gang morphs birds, and they get out of there in what must be one of the least complicated missions they've ever done, which is pretty funny when you think about it. The gang has gone through some really elaborate and silly plans to achieve far less substantial goals than this, but when it comes to destroying the source of all Yeerk sustenance on the planet, they basically just morph their biggest animals, kick the door in, and break the thing on the ground. Wonderful. The next and final scene in the book shows Rachel and her dad, who is packing to leave for his new job. Rachel's decided to stay back in whatever town she lives in with the Animorphs, and also to keep fighting the Yeerks. Tobias circles above, and after Rachel's dad leaves, she joins him in the sky. The end. I forgot what a trip this book is. I've been in varying stages of sobriety and inebriation while reading it, and it's been a lot. It seems like at first KA takes a fixed timeline approach to time travel, where time is basically this big old unchangeable loop a la Harry Potter. Kind of, nothing's really consistent in Harry Potter, but it subsequently seems confirmed that it's a multiple dimension sort of thing. Maybe the Ellimist's expertise is just in the various timelines of this dimension, but when it comes to interdimensional stuff, he's out of his depth. Just a theory. I've talked a lot about the Ellimist, so I'm gonna try not to repeat myself here. Ultimately, everything that I've set aside, his ethics do operate at a level far beyond my comprehension, so everything that I'm doing here is kind of just like narrow-minded mortal nitpicking. Let's rate the book on its various qualities. For plot, I am giving this book a 9. It is very cool. I love time travel, even when it's done sloppily. Not that this is done sloppily, just like I have read time travel books that did it worse than this and still enjoyed them, so obviously I enjoyed this quite a bit. It's also getting a 9 for significance because we learn a lot about the Ellimist here, for better or for worse, and he pops up a lot later. This is like our introduction to his kind of shaky reasoning as well. This book also simultaneously shows us how high the stakes are in the fight fight against the Yeerks and how bleak the potential outcome of these books can be, as well as gives us hope that the Animorphs might actually win the war. It also gets significance points because they destroy the Kandrona, and I feel like that's mentioned a ton as the series goes on. For character, I am giving this book a 4. I know that Rachel's going through some shit here, but I feel like the way that her character develops in her side plot is fully separate from the main plot of the book, and I feel like Rachel, adds very little to the main plot. Rachel's arc is coming to terms with the part that she plays in the group, and I guess this does a little bit towards getting us there. She has her kind of berserker moment, but within the context of this book itself, it doesn't really add a ton. You guys are free to disagree with me, obviously. I don't think that I'm like, an infallible Animorphs expert. This is just my interpretation of the book. You gotta give some of them low grades in some of the categories, otherwise everything's just gonna be a 10 and this whole series is gonna be pointless. Anyway, in this book, Cassie does most of the reasoning through the Ellimist meddling. Jake does all of the leading. Rachel kind of just says, let's do it at a crucial moment, and also has some like moments of bloodlust, which we know are going to be important to her development going forward. So I'm giving it a 4. I already wrote the script. It's done. It just felt a little bit disjointed to me. I like the book a lot, don't get me wrong, but Rachel's presence just seems like a little bit of an afterthought here. And her family life situation is cool in that it probably was appreciated by kids with a similar home situation who read the books, but it seems like K.A. was trying to tie the main plot to Rachel's side plot by having Rachel's motivation be that she wants her father to think highly of her, but it seems like that was just a little bit tacked on so that the two things could be related in the book. I wasn't a really huge fan of it. I don't think it was super well developed, but it's fine. It really is fine. This is still a good book. It's still an Animorphs book. It's still an early Animorphs book written by K.A. herself, so it's still quite good. For writing, I gave it an 8 because K.A. wrote it, and it does the trick. So the final score here is 7.55, which actually puts it in 7th place of the 7 books that we've read. Wow. It kind of is what it is, I guess. They can't all be on the top, and when we look at the first 7 books of the series, these are, like, the best Animorphs books. I mean, like, from now until, like, maybe 19, like from here to book 20, from book 1 to 20, it's just banger after banger after banger. So coming in 7th place out of 7th in like the context of what we've looked at so far, we've got the invasion, the visitor, the encounter, the predator, and the capture. That was 5 books. I don't know which one I just didn't, whatever. It's late here. Anyway, yeah, feel free to defend the book in the comments section because I want as many comments as possible so that maybe the algorithm decides that these videos are good and more people watch them, but don't yell at me too much about it. I still like this book quite a bit. This is just what the numbers say. I didn't make up the formula. I did make up the formula. This is all my fault. Anyway, you guys want to know about meeting K.A. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. We went on like a vacation specifically for this. My wife's brother lives in Boston or like outside of Boston, so we went and visited them because Kay was going to Brookline Booksmiths or whatever, some like famous bookstore there. I don't know. I guess she didn't come to New York, maybe. I don't know. I didn't see that she was coming. Frankly, I had a great time there, and I had a better time in Boston with my wife's brother and them drinking and having fun than I would have had if I had to drive into the city for a day for this. I'm from New York. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, but I'm just like kind of over going into the city. I'm a suburb boy now. I live in, the Hudson Valley. It's so much better up here. You hear those? You hear that? That's silence and bugs. We never got that in the city. That truck I was yelling at before, it would like, I'd never be able to film these videos in the city. It would be so loud anyway. So I drove out to Brookline for like one of the nights that we were there, and she was promoting this book, about dogs, Dogtown, I think it was called, with another author. So I felt a little bit awkward showing up and like going to the signing and kind of like rude. I felt rude. I felt very rude. I tried to like be engaged and like not let this other author feel like she was being overshadowed by K.A.'s middle grade star power, but I wasn't the only person there who was like very enthralled to see K.A. and treated this lady like a bit of an afterthought. Not that I treated her like an afterthought. I tried very hard not to. Anyway, I showed up and I had my copy of The Change in my hand, and it looked like she kind of rolled her eyes at me, and I was like, yep, it's another 35-year-old Animorphs guy, like, here to talk to you about these books that you wrote a long time ago. I got a feeling that she doesn't, like, love these books that much. Like, they did a lot of Q&A, and she talked about a lot of the other books that she wrote. Barely mentioned Animorphs, except for to say that writing a book a month is a very bad idea because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So I guess fair play, because, like, there are a fair amount of sort of inconsistencies in these books. A lot of things that get corrected for the second printing of them. So I was a little worried at first that I was going to be annoying her, or that she wasn't going to appreciate my Animorphs-ness. my Animorphs fandom or being bombarded by a middle-aged man about books that she wrote 20 years ago. But she was actually really gracious and really nice. I told her about the YouTube channel, and we talked a little bit about the different characters, and I told her that I was asking her to sign the change because Tobias is my favorite character, and she was like, oh, Tobias is my favorite character as well. And then we both at the same time were like, and Marco is very good too. And she was like, yes, and Axe. And we basically then just listed all the characters, which is invariably what happens when I talk Animorphs characters to anyone. We just start talking about how good each of the characters are, because they are all very good. Someone commented, by the way, on a few videos ago saying that Cassie was a self-insert for KA. Confirmed, because I told her about how I have like a sort of series where I talk about how Cassie might be the most underrated Animorph and how it's got like decent views. It does, like in the grand scheme of things for this channel. That's one of my better performing videos. And she said that she was really happy to hear that because people always thought Cassie was super boring, but that Cassie was her like representation of herself in the book. So she was glad to see that Cassie was getting redeemed later on, which made me very happy. I'm trying to remember what else happened here. So yeah, I just told her that they were like wonderful escapist fantasy and that they were really important to me as a kid and that I obviously have never gotten over them. And she seemed to really appreciate that. And she hugged me, which it was really sweet. She was really nice. And I like wasn't planning on getting a picture with her or anything. I showed up to this thing alone, like my wife and brother-in-law and like sister-in-law or whatever did not come with me, but she like found another fan and was like, will you take a picture with us? It was just really great. It was wonderful. I was like on cloud 9 leaving Brookline Booksmiths after all this, and she signed my book and it says, for Marcello, Anna fan extraordinaire. So it was just like an awesome thing. It was probably one of the coolest things that I've done in coolest things, like trivially cool, right? Like I've had, life experiences lately that were nice and everything, but in terms of sort of like frivolous cool things, this was easily at the very top of the list of cool things that I've done. I was so glad that I went. I was so nervous driving there too, and so nervous about like being judged, I guess, or like bothering her. And she was so warm and so nice and really seemed to appreciate what I'm sure was like, I'm like a carbon copy of a million other people who probably come up to her and bother her about how cool Animorphs are while she's trying to promote other books. And she said she loves Animorphs fans. She was like, Animorphs fans are really great. She said they seem like she said we, right? All of us. She said that we seem like a really kind and like positive group of people. And I have to say, I agree. The comment sections here are always really good. There's always great discussions. It's so easy in fandoms to get like snarky with people and like be like annoying about knowing more than other people or like nitpicky about people's ideas. And I certainly am not like correct in everything that I say in these videos. I just kind of do my best to interpret things as I read them, but it's not like I took notes every time that I read these books, So like I get some stuff wrong and I miss some things, and you guys are always super gracious in the comment section, like helping me with my own ideas or telling me what I missed or telling me things that I might not have considered. So yeah, she seems to agree that we're all very nice, good people. And I think, given the current sort of social climate, that's not something that should be taken lightly. It's great. You should all be really proud of yourselves. I'm proud of myself. And it was a wonderful experience. I'm going to close the video here. I promised that it would get rambly, and it certainly has. Thank you guys for watching. As usual, I will try to be more consistent in the future. These words are so meaningless at this point. But I am going to try to be more consistent because I appreciate that you guys watch these, and I don't want to take that for granted. Thank you very much.